This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Expectations is something that we love to talk about, and it's something that I made sure I set concrete numbers for when it came to what the Browns should expect to do statistically on both sides of the ball here. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the expectations, if the Browns are living up to expectations, and if they're not, where are they specifically failing those expectations? How badly are they failing those expectations? Should we be concerned about it? And also, what can be done to improve on these expectations? So that being said, I'm going to put out right here so you can read the entire video, the expectations and what is and is not being lived up to right now, right? So everything in red is something that's below expectation. Everything in dark red with white letters is something that I find to be genuinely concerning, and under expectation, and anything green is fine, right? So that's where we are. Let's discuss line by line. So the first thing that is above expectations, well, below expectations, is sacks from specifically Myles Garrett and Za'Darius Smith. Now, I'm not really that concerned with this because, yes, I expected them by this point of the year to have at least 14 sacks. Last year, the Myles and the top edge rusher combined average for about 9 sacks. So 11.5 is a fine pace. I expect Za'Darius Smith to pop off and get like a multiple sack game. And I think Myles has many more multiple sack games in him. So I think by the end of the year, they'll catch up to this number fine. Right now, they're a little below, and I think that's because Za'Darius got off to a little bit of a slow start when it comes to finishing plays. I think eventually he's going to get there, and there will be opportunities to get there for the rest of the year. So yes, that's under expectations, but because of all the other things that are above expectations for this defense, especially in that area, I'm not really that concerned about it. Honestly, it's a non-concern. Team sacks, I thought that they would be at 21 at this point of the year. They're at 33. Somebody brought up a great point. In my video, my original video about these expectations, I said it would be tough to think that this defense could get anywhere near what the Philadelphia Eagles got to last year. And right now, they're not on pace to do that, but they're on pace to get to like 68 or 69, which is crazy. So right now, 33 team sacks through 8 games. They got 9 games left. So, you know, it's not out the realm of possibility that they do hit that 17 number. They're 12 sacks above expectations, 17 above last year. Last year, they had 16 sacks in half the year. If you look at where the Browns were at the end of the year, I believe they were at 33 sacks. No, 34 sacks. The Browns finished the year with 34 sacks last year. They're already at 33. Yeah, man. Yeah, the defensive tackle room's been insane. I mean, just look at what they did last game versus this Arizona Cardinals. I think almost every player in that defensive tackle room got at least a TFL, if not a sack. That's just, imagine saying that last year. Imagine saying that last year. It could not happen. I think the Browns had 6 players or something like that get credit for a sack at some point, or at least a TFL. Crazy. Pressures have been pretty good. I expected them to be at 63 at this point in the season. Right now, they're at 73. That's a great improvement. Last year, they were at 18%, so a 10% improvement almost. Incredible growth by this defensive line. I mean, like all those numbers across the board are pretty damn good. Even the one that's below expectation. I'm like, well, if we're betting on Miles and Za'Darius, they're probably going to get back up there, especially when you look at their pressure numbers. First downs given up as a defense, I expected them at this point of the year to give up 147. That was the acceptable number for this defense. This right now, they're at 96. So they're way above acceptable. That's plus 51 from last year. So they have, well, minus 51 technically, but that's 51 less first downs that you've given up above expectation. I mean, that's an incredible number. This is just an insane stat. I think I tweeted on Twitter a stat line that the Browns start on average defensively with like the 25th worst field position in the NFL at the 30-yard line, but they only give up 4 plays and on average 17 yards. Like you get 2 sets of downs on average when you play this Browns defense. It's insane numbers. Insane numbers that they put out. I think their score percentage is insanely low. So I think it's like 20, and we'll get to that. It's number 1 in the NFL. All right, so run game is where you have a little bit of concern, right? If you look here, the only place on the defensive side of the ball where you see that deep red is with the run defense. And I think everybody who's watched this defense would agree with that. The run defense, while most of the time it's pretty good, they're susceptible to missed tackles. Sometimes they just get completely washed for a quarter. Like if there's anything that's going to fold on this defense, it's usually the run defense, and that then adds into some of the pass issues that they have at times. So run yards per game, they've given up 144 this year. It's 30th. It's better than last year where you were historically bad at 165, but the expectation was 109, so a significant drop of expectation. I am actually concerned about. I don't really trust this run defense for a full 4 quarters to be able to keep a team like the Baltimore Ravens or any team that really excels at running the ball to keep them under wraps for a consistent period of time, even though they've done it at times. In some games like Christian McCaffrey, you still worry about that. Rushing touchdowns, 9, tied for 23rd least in the NFL. The expectation was to be at 7, which would be at like 15th in the NFL. Last year, you gave up 10 rushing touchdowns. So again, you don't want to be near that number. So that's not good at all. Passes defended, 36. The expectation was 40. The expectation would be like in the top 10 in passes defended. Right now, you're at 18th in the NFL. Not too concerned about this because since teams only average about 4 plays a drive, that means 2 of them are probably passing plays. You just haven't seen that many passes. So the passes defended number, that raw number is probably going to be below expectation, but that's because of good performance on the defense. So that doesn't really concern me that it's below expectation because the other numbers are up, right? The other numbers are really, really good. QB rate like that. That's QB. If QB rate were low and passes defended were low, that'd be a concern. But this being up and that being down, that's not a concern, right? So 73.2 rate, 3rd in the NFL. So that's the 3rd lowest QB rate in the NFL. Any defense holds opposing quarterbacks to. So really good there. The expectation was to be around top 10. So like 85 would put you there. And they have greatly exceeded that. Score percentage is 1st in the NFL. I was like hoping that they'd be around 36 at the beginning of the year, which would put them at 15, given how bad they were last year. They're at 1st, and they're at 1st with a significant lead there. And the shutout that they just had is going to do nothing but help that. So score percentage, really good. Great thing, above expectation. Takeaways. You had 13 takeaways which is tied for ninth. They've really gone on a rally the last 3 weeks here with turnovers. The expectation was to have about 11 at this point in time, so you're above expectation, which would be at 19th. So being a top 10 team in takeaways, definitely a welcome change. Tackle for loss, you're at 51, second in the NFL. The expectation was that you'd be at 38, which is 23rd in the NFL. Last year you were 32 TFLs, which was 31st in the NFL. So they were awful at TFLs and getting turnovers. They're a bad defense last year, man. Like, you look at these numbers from last year and you're like, man, it's hard to believe this is the same defense. Well, not the same defense. It's hard to believe that, like, they've only really added 3 or 4 starters. Like, this seems like a completely different defense when you look at it, but the numbers are just incredible. Interception percentage, 3.3%, which is 5th in the NFL. Last year, you were at 2.119, so it's a nice improvement there. Interceptions, the expectation was to be at 7. Right now, you're at 7. Last year, you had 5, so it's an improvement of +2, and you met the expectations there. Drive start, this is more of a offense and special team stat, if I'm being honest. 29.8. You want it to be, which puts you at 25th in the NFL. The expectation was to be at 27, which would put you at 9th in the NFL. And that's just, that has a lot more to do with the offense and special teams, right? Turnovers create bad numbers on that drive start. And I think bad punts will do that to you. And honestly, the punting's been fine. So that's because the offense turns the ball over like nobody's business. That's why that looks like that. Sacks. All right, let's look at the offensive side. Now, this is where you see a lot more red, unfortunately. Right? If we look at this offensive side of the ball, we see a trend, right? Defense, lots of green. And green's really, really good, right? Because the expectation was high for this defense, given that I was expecting to make a pretty massive improvement to get to like around top 10 from one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year. And they're just exceeding even those expectations. So like that much green for the defense is insane. I really can't put into context how being at the place that we are, where you can argue that my preseason expectations are like massively undershot what this defense is capable of. Like the improvement from last year is just insane. Like the fact that we're here is insane. All right. But you notice, it's a little bit of a different story on the offensive side. Now, there's not as much deep red here. I do think a lot of the problems on offense are fixable and likely to get fixed. I only see a couple of things here in deep red where I'm like, oh man, I don't know if that's going to get fixed. So let's look at the offensive stuff. Sacks, you are at 24th, which puts you at 24th in the NFL. Last year, you were at 20. The expectation was that you be at 21. I understand this is below expectation. Given what you've had go on, not only at quarterback, right? You were down to PJ Walker, but also on the offensive line, you're now out for a significant portion, both of your starting tackles. This is all right. Like, I don't really hate this sack number. It's not great. You obviously want to get closer, and hopefully Deshaun can fix some of his issues with getting sacked and be a little bit more aware and focus in the pocket and keep this number nice and low like he did last week versus the Arizona Cardinals. But, yeah, I'm not too upset with this sack number, even though it's below expectation. It's not god awful given the circumstances, and I think it could be much worse. All right, sack percentage is at 8.1, which is 29th in the NFL. Last year it was at 7.5. The expectation was that we'd be improved to 6.5. This is a concern, right? We're giving up more sacks per percentage. Now, some of this has to do with offensive line play. Some of it has to do with quarterback play. I think both of those things need to meet in the middle. I don't know if they reach that expectation number of 6.5, but if they can get back to 7.5 to 7 range, I think that will be fine by the end of the season. And I think they'll be fine with that number if they can just get it up a little bit. All right, let's look at turnovers. This is our first deep red item on offense. And we know this has been the bane of this offense's existence for the first part of this year. They've given up 17 turnovers, 29th in the NFL. It's hard to believe the teams have turned the ball over more than the Browns. Last year, the Browns were pretty good with turnovers, only gave up 10, and that put them in 10th in the NFL last year. Expectation was to be at 10. You're plus 7 turnovers above expectation. I find it hard to believe that we're going to get those 7 turnovers back, right? And what I mean by that is I don't think you're meeting your turnover expectation this year. That seems like a pretty cooked number, to be honest to you. Turnover percentage, 16%, top 5 in the NFL when it comes to turning the ball over. Last year, 11.2, which would be 15th. Obviously, you want it to be closer to 15 here. Again, deep red here. I just find this hard to believe that it's going to meet expectation. I think the turnovers, while they aren't going to be as frequent for the rest of the year, if we want this to like even out and still meet expectations at the end of the year, I'd be very surprised if that happened. First downs, I don't think this number is too bad. They're at 153 first downs throughout the year, 22nd in the NFL. Last year, they were at 164, 16th in the NFL. This has a lot to do with quarterback play. I think once quarterback play improves, this number's going to shoot up. And if Deshaun Watson stays healthy, I expect that to happen. Score percentage, another thing that goes along with quarterback play. 34%, 21st in the NFL. Last year, they had about 34.6, 20th in the NFL. So as much noise as we made about Jacoby Brissett or Josh Dobbs or getting a better quarterback in here, one thing you do have to give credit to, DTR didn't score when he played, but so PJ Walker, when he came in, was that he was able to score at a high enough clip that you really didn't lose much, right? It ended up being a 0.6 difference in score percentage from having that situation last year to what they have right now. The expectation, though, was to be at 39, which would be 11th in the NFL. I think if you put together a month or two of good quarterback play, I think you'll get close to that number, if not hit that number. So I'm all right with that. Run yards per game, I'm kind of surprised that we're in the green here, right? Run yards per game, 144, third in the NFL. Last year, you had 146, which got you to 6th in the NFL. I guess teams aren't running the ball as effectively this year. But yeah, I mean, like the fact that you're even close to a Nick Chubb number with a Nick Chubb-less run game, that's good. Yards per attempt, 4.1, which is 17th in the NFL. Last year, you had 4.7, which was 8. Again, it's a Nick Chubb number. You're not going to hit it. If you don't have Nick Chubb, I expect you to be average, and that's right now what they are when it comes to yards per attempt. They're average in the NFL. But the fumbles, right? This is just a rushing stat. So then when they're fumbling the ball, has also been a big part of the turnovers, right? We know the interceptions. The passing offense has thrown, 11 interceptions. But the fumbles have added to that. And if you do some quick napkin math, you would notice 6 of these 13 fumbles have been recovered by the opposing team to count for a turnover. But on offense, you fumbled the ball 13 times, 26 in the NFL. Last year, you fumbled 7 times. Third in the NFL. Now, again, that's got a lot to do with Nick Chubb not being in there, but I don't care who's running the ball. Like 13 fumbles in 8 games is a bit ridiculous. The expectation should be around 10. Like just be average again from the run game perspective, or just like when you tuck the ball, we should be average there at the very least. And that would be about 10. So you're plus 3 away from being average. It's not good. So they got to figure that one out. Pressure percentage. Last year they got pressured 22.5% of the time. Now they're getting pressured 25% of the time. It's a bit of a concern there, especially on the offensive line, especially since Jed Wills is not going to be back for a little while. And especially since we don't know what Jed Wills is going to be once he comes back, right? Knee injuries are a different beast for big players, and he is a giant one. So Going to be something to look at there. Let's look at some of these individual expectations. Amari Cooper above expectations right now with 617 and 2 touchdowns. The range for him was about 470 to 589 with 3 to 5 touchdowns. Now, obviously, he's short 1 touchdown, but if you've watched him, you would know there's been a couple plays. There's been a couple plays where he's been robbed of a touchdown, and there's been a couple plays where he's just gone down like at the 1 yard line, like a handful of them. I could easily see if he like just gets the extra yard, he'd be at like 5 touchdowns. But he's out of his range right now when it comes to yards for Amari Cooper this year at 617. So he's outplaying the high end of his receiving range right now. Yeah, he's doing really well. A guy who's not doing really well, and we really need to start talking about this more, is Elijah Moore. He's gotten 50 targets so far, 270 yards, no touchdowns. Now, his expectation range was between 282 and 2 touchdowns and 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's what the expectation range was for Elijah Moore. He is just out the range of yards again for the second time in a row. And he's nowhere near the touchdown goal. And if you look at last year, through 11 games, but he had 8 of those games, and 8 of those 11 games he got a target. So I'm only counting the 8 games he had a target in. He got 36 targets in those 8 games, and he had 284 yards and 1 touchdown. He was more productive last year with the New York Jets than he is right now with the Cleveland Browns. Now, again, stable quarterback play can do a lot to change this and get him back into that range. All he needs is a couple touchdowns to get back into that range. But, you know, this is not the most encouraging stat line Elijah Moore has put together in the first half of this season. It can change. Deshaun can get it together with him and really find that chemistry. But the one thing I will say is that I've seen that chemistry with Deshaun and David Njoku. I've seen that chemistry with Deshaun and Amari Cooper. In practice, I saw it with Elijah Moore, but I'm just not seeing it right now in games. Like, I don't think we've seen it in games. So something to be concerned about. Passing game total right now, we're at 1,600 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. Now let's talk about Deshaun Watson. Yeah, and I'm going to just put that in the red. I ain't going to even compare that shit to no expectation, because ain't no way 7 touchdowns and 11 interceptions is at expectation. Like, that's just far below expectation, and the yard total's low too. All right, let's talk about Deshaun Watson, who's below expectation right now. Now, if we just average out what our expectation range was for him in just 4 starts, I'm being extra generous here by just counting the 4 starts, not the 5 starts. We expected him to be anywhere between 1,000 to 1,145 yards, 6 touchdowns to 3 interceptions to 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, and about 7.1 to 7.8 yards per attempt. We expected him to only take 11 sacks, 118 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's where the expectation range was for Deshaun Watson's stat line. In some areas, he's meeting expectations. In other areas, he's slightly below them. I don't think that this stat line's overly concerning, to be honest with you. Like, I think it's under expectation. I think you can explain why it's under expectation. And if you can do that, then I feel like you're fine with it. 902 yards, so you're about 100 yards underneath expectation. Makes sense. He really hasn't been able to have a ton of time this year to get these reps in that he really does need. Like, it's obvious he needs reps. Like, when you watch the broadcast, they're even pointing it out. Like, this isn't just biased Cleveland fans saying stuff. Like, it's obvious that this is a quarterback who needs game reps. The 6 touchdowns to 3 interceptions does meet the lower end of those expectations. You thought you would be at 7.1 yards per attempt. Right now, you're at 6.5 yards per attempt, so you would like to get that up. 13 sacks versus 11 sacks, which is getting better, right? Because I think in the first quarter of the season, you were really blowing this. But right now, it's not too bad. Again, the game in Arizona really helps out things. And even rushing totals, you're, 12 yards under rush expectations. You're at 105, 1 touchdown, 5.8 per, which is above the expectation of 5.6 per carry. So, you're slightly below expectations in some areas moderately below expectations, right? I would say sacks, you're slightly below, rushing yards, you're slightly below, rushing touchdowns, you're slightly below, yards per attempt, you're moderately below expectation, and throwing yards, you're moderately below expectation as well. So that's where we are as a team. Obviously, the one thing that really matters is where the record expectation was. I thought this would be 11-win team. Right now, they're 5-3. That's about on track to be an 11-win team. So the win-loss record is in the green, which is good. Like, that's where you want to be at. But right now, some other things just aren't where you want them to be, and it's mainly on the offensive side of the ball. So coming away from this, what do we know about this team? Where this team is excelling when it comes to being above expectation is along the defensive line. The defensive line is the key to this defense. The defensive line is the strength of this defense. And if you look at every strong green area for this defensive line, for this defense, it starts with the defensive line, right? So that's the strength of this defense. That's what's been performing above expectation. The run defense has not been what you have wanted it to be. You can hope it gets better, and I do think it will as time goes on. And I think some areas you could say the passing defense could be a little bit better, but they're not bad at all. Offensively, your biggest disappointments are in the passing game, in the pass blocking game, and that's not a surprise, right? That's where you've had the bulk of your injuries. You have the bulk of your injuries on the offensive line and at quarterback. So it's no surprise that the offensive line and quarterback are what's been hurt the most. Receiving wise, you're actually doing fine. Only one of your projected high value targets hasn't been living up to expectation, but David Njoku is right in his expectation range with 319 and 2 touchdowns. So he's comfortably where you wanted him to be this year, and Amari Cooper's above it. So receiving wise, you're fine. But if you look at the two areas that have been underperforming, it's the two areas that have been injured the most, the offensive line and quarterback. And that's not really the most complicated problem to solve. You want to get healthy there. And if they do get healthy, I expect things to change at quarterback. And I think offensive line will stable out and soon enough, because I think they can get through this Jed Wills injury. We'll see how these next 2 weeks go. But that is the expectations for the Cleveland Browns. Who's meeting them? Who's not? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night.